Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. A judge this afternoon rules that Ripple is not in itself an investment contract. Joining me to discuss what the broader implications are for the crypto space, we have Scott Melker, crypto trader and investor. He's also the host of the Wolf of All Streets podcast. Scott, I mean, you've got to be an indicator. Every time you come on the show the day before, we have to put some kind of position on because these things seem to break. When you're on, tell us exactly what happened with the Ripple ruling and what it could potentially mean for the space.
Well, for once, things are breaking in the right direction, right? As opposed to talking about why the market is down so far. Listen, this Ripple action has been going on for years, and effectively now we have clarity from Judge Torres saying that the secondary sales of Ripple and XRP are not a security. And this really takes the wind out of the SEC's case against Coinbase. It takes the wind out of a number of other SEC enforcement actions. We've seen 67 different coins listed in these SEC enforcement actions as securities without that ever being litigated or them after going after these projects. And basically that is invalid now. If the secondary sale of XRP is not in fact the sale of a security, then what Coinbase is doing is largely compliant and there's no case that the SEC has there. So this is really yet another in the string of SEC losses that many people were not anticipating. And you can tell that Gary Gensler has just way out over his skis here with all these enforcement actions and all of these attacks on the industry. If XRP is not a security, Ethereum is clearly not a security. We know that Bitcoin is not a security. So all of those coins that have been listed in these actions over and over and over again that have seen 30, 40, 50% declines each time they name one, each of them is really getting their sort of sigh of relief now and their redemption.
And Scott, you know what's so interesting? Just yesterday, U.S. Senators Jill and Loomis reintroduced legislation to create federal regulatory framework for Bitcoin to make sure that crypto can prosper in America. So if it's not getting done from regulatory agencies, we're going to have to legislate this. So to see that this framework was just reintroduced yesterday, and then the timing of this couldn't be any better.
Yeah, and can I point out the fact that in that proposed legislation, they're giving much more power to the CFTC and taking it away from the SEC. And that includes exchanges being regulated by the CFTC rather than the SEC. So that once again takes even more wind out of the sails of the SEC here. If they're going after exchanges with enforcement actions, that they could end up being ruled to not even be in charge of regulating those very exchanges.
Yeah. Let's talk about Bitcoin for a moment here. It appears to have decoupled from the market even more. When we saw, a couple bullish days in a row here, Bitcoin didn't necessarily match the action that we saw in stocks.
Good, right? Because everybody gets really angry when we talk about Bitcoin being a correlated or not correlated asset. I've always said that when you look at the correlation over any long period of time, that it's largely not correlated, but it's a good thing that Bitcoin is now traveling its own path and it doesn't react to macro things like CPI and PPI and Fed speakers and interest rate hikes. Because at the end of the day, the argument for Bitcoin was always that it was a hedge against these other markets. So it should be traveling on its own path for that to be proven. I would actually be discouraged if we saw immediate market movement on inflation news, because that's not what we want Bitcoin to be. That's not the core ethos of what we believe that it can. So the fact that it's at historical low correlations, not only with stocks, but also with tech stocks specifically, with gold, the inverse correlation to the dollar and DXY has dropped. I mean, it's basically become untethered and uncorrelated to everything and for quite a long time now. And I think that that's what we want to see. We want to know that Bitcoin can trade as its own market.
All right, Scott, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.